Hi, welcome to the Organic You. This is another session of In the Pantry, and I'm going to talk about a product that's been around for a while, but for some reason it seems to have fallen out of favor. I don't hear it spoken of too much anymore, but it is agave. It is a natural sweetener. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is I dreamed about having a conversation about this, so I think somebody really needs to take heed and maybe put this in their diet. The focus of this is really for my friends who are dealing with or have dealt with a battle with cancer. I'd like to say you are an overcomer instead of a survivor. But sugar is not a good ingredient in your continued diet once you have overcome that particular disorder. And agave is a good substitution. And I want to talk a little bit more about agave and sugar and what sugar does with cancer cells, because it's important for you to decrease your intake of sugar when you have dealt with that particular disorder or are dealing with that disorder. But let me read you some information about agave, and let me get some glasses here so I can actually see what I'm reading. Now, agave does come from a plant. It is a plant-based, so those of you who are vegan, vegetarian, you can use agave. It's not like honey. It doesn't come from an animal. It is plant-based. It has a low glycemic index. It has no sodium. It is a low carbohydrate. Let's see what else we have. Many of the health physicians indicate that agave is a good alternative to processed sugar. Now, if you notice when I talk about my baking, I always indicate that I use raw cane sugar. Even in that, if I'm baking for someone who's dealing with or has dealt with a battle with cancer, I always ask that you let me know, because I will switch out the raw cane sugar to something like applesauce or use agave instead of the raw cane sugar. Even though the raw cane is not does not spike your sugars as quickly as a processed sugar does, it still will act in the same manner as feeding those cells. Sugar feeds cells, and I have a demo that I want to show you as well about what sugar can feed. The agave plant is a desert plant. It has succulents from which the syrup, the nectar, which is what's here, comes from. And you see a little sample of the plant on front of this bottle. Let me see what else. Just trying to hit the key points for you as we talk a little bit more about it. Now, you can cook with agave. You have to adjust your baking. Baking is like chemistry. You have to figure out what works with what and how much. You do have to adjust a little bit because it is a different sweet profile that you get when you use agave. So you have to taste it and figure out how you want it to work in your baked goods. In cooking, I don't think it's that much of a difference, because most times when you're cooking and making an ingredient, maybe stovetop, and you put a little sugar in it, you can substitute in the agave. You will not get too much kickback of a different flavor. So in that instance, you can do a one-for-one substitution. But in baking, you need to taste it, because based on the other ingredients you're using, like your flavoring, it may alter that taste a little bit, and so you need to experiment with it to make sure you know what you're going to get. If you're not sure and you're baking, your best bet is to switch to applesauce. I should say no sugar applesauce, and not the processed ones that has a lot of sugar in it. Agave, and I'm just looking up my notes here about agave. I think that's all that I had on the note indication. Yeah, that's it. But I wanted to show this little experiment so that you can visually see what sugar does. And I'm going to do it with just plain water and, believe it or not, yeast. And yeast is acting like a cell in your body, okay? So when you we're going to put a tablespoon of yeast in just plain warm water, and we sprinkle that in, and you see the yeast sitting on top. It's not doing anything, it will sit. But now we're going to feed it. And how are we going to feed it? We're going to give it sugar. Absolutely. Sugar feeds yeast. It's an active ingredient, active cell. And when you put sugar to yeast, you will see that in cooking terms, it blooms. Blooms mean it increases in volume, it spreads, and it grows. Same thing, and I wanted to show you that I'm sprinkling in the sugar. I'm just putting the sugar right on top of the yeast. And you see how it's starting to cloud and look different on the bottom? The sugar has already started to feed the yeast. Same thing that sugar, when you have cancer cells, it starts to feed those cells. And the same reaction that happens when you feed sugar to yeast happens to those cells. It starts to grow and bloom and gets bigger and can spread. And so we're going to let this sit for a couple minutes because it happens in a couple, not too long, in a couple minutes it happens. And you are amazed at how quickly and how rapidly the yeast has its foundation. The foundation is a warm liquid, like we have warmth in our bodies, and we give our bodies sugar. We give the yeast sugar, and it starts to react. And actually you can see, I'm going to try to tilt you down so that you can see what's happening in the cup. There we are. You see it's starting to bubble a little bit, and it's starting to have a fragrance. You're starting to smell the yeast reacting to the sugar. So I'm going to sit this aside while we continue to talk about agave, so that when we come back to it and I see it's reacting already, but I'm going to sit it to the side. And like I said, I feel like I've had this conversation before because I dreamed about talking about this, and that's why I said I don't know if someone needs to understand why they're being told not to consume sugar while they're in the middle of their battle with cancer, or that they have recovered and they are overcomer and they're struggling with giving up sugar. It should not be a struggle for you. You need to know what the sugar is doing in your body that's not a benefit to you at this particular time. And when you understand that, and when you can see, I always say when you can visualize what's happening, it gives you a better focus to do something different and change the behavior that you feel that you can't change. And that means looking at alternatives, looking at the agave. Now, I know I've been asked about stevia. Stevia also is a plant-based sweetener. I have tried the stevia because I just wanted to see what the flavor profile was, how it worked in cooking. Now, for me, for my palate, I didn't appreciate it as much because I notice a slight aftertaste. Now that's my palate. Everyone's palate is different. So I don't discourage you from trying it. Go get it, try it, see if you like it. Some people say they don't detect a difference at all. They enjoy it and they love it. And if you do, then go with that. But if you have a problem and you detect that little bit of an aftertaste with it, then try some other products. Keep going through the various plant-based options to try it. Now, I do not recommend the little pink packets. They aren't the best for you. I won't call them by name, but I would steer away from those. I would really recommend and highly suggest that you lean towards the plant-based and not the chemical produced sweeteners. And I just want to show you, yep, my sugars are forming. See how they're building up around the perimeter of the glass? They're starting to adhere. Now this is the yeast being fed by sugar, and it's taking on its action of growing. And see how it's forming, and it's looking where it can stick. So it will stick to the perimeter and start to bloom, what we call in cooking bloom. That means it's expanding, it's getting bigger, it's getting strength, it's expanding in the vessel that it's in. And we can see some of it forming on the tops. And see how it's clouding, see that bubble that's sitting in the middle? That's what sugar is doing, it's feeding it. It's as if it's having a feeding moment, a feeding frenzy, because I've given it what it's looking for, to give it energy. So I'm going to set that aside again. Hopefully before I finish it will, I may have put a little more water in a bigger dish, but it still will bloom. But I wanted you to see this. Like I said, I feel like I've had this conversation because it kept going over and over in my mind, and kept having this conversation, not sure why, but I think someone needs to understand what sugar does, how best to eliminate it from your diet, how best to work around. You can still bake, you can still cook, you can still enjoy other options for sugar or sweet ingredients, but it's best to take something that does not work well for you, especially if you have a specific condition, to take it out of your diet. And what only thing I'm saying is, let's look at options. Now, I will post with this some other natural plant-based options for sweeteners that you can consider. And again, it is your palate. It is what you find that will work for your taste buds, what you sense. Like I said, with stevia, it's okay. You can cook with stevia. But for me, I just tend to, there's a note in it that I taste that I can hide it if I use certain flavors. But with agave, I don't have that same sensation. But make a choice not to continue to use even the raw cane sugar, and that's what I'm using in this experiment here, or even the processed sugar. And that includes the brown sugars and the dark brown sugars as well. What I want you to do is go to a plant-based. That's really what I'm saying. Go to a plant-based sweetener. And before I hang up with you, wow, I hope I can get this seen here. If I tip down, there, see that marginal that's sitting in the water? That's a formation of the chunk of yeast that's eaten the sugar and formed almost like a ring cell. And let me bring that up. I just want you to see that. I hope everyone can. There's 2 of them that's formed, and more will form as well. I want you to have that visualization. I want you to be able to see what's happening when sugar feeds that which utilizes it in a negative manner. Now, for baking, this is perfect. This is what we want. We want sugar to feed the yeast because it blooms, and we put it in our breads and in our baked goods and making pastries. But when it's a cell in your body that is contributing to a disorder, this is not what you want to have happen. And when you're continually feeding your body sugar, this is what you're allowing to happen in your body. So I think this is the conclusion for me. I just wanted to bring this to you. As I said, I dreamt about this, talking about this, going through this. So I feel like I'm presenting it for a second time, but I think somebody really needs to hear it, have the visualization so that you can digest mentally what we're saying about sugar, so that you can make an informed decision about not keeping it in your diet when there are other plant-based alternatives that are more healthy for you, that will help you while you're either in your battle to become an overcomer, or you are already an overcomer and you want to keep your body healthy. Again, I'm going to post some information in the discussion section when I post this particular video. This is, again, in the pantry, and we're talking about blue agave. There are other ones. There's other versions of agave, just not the blue agave. There's other products out. I just happen to like this one, so this is the one I have, and you see I use it quite a bit. We're kind of low. This is just one that I like, but you can check out any of them, any brand that you find, you can check it out and see if it will work for you. But please stop and take note of what you have in your diet. Make the steps. I know everything can't be done overnight. Make the effort and the steps to take the raw sugar or the processed sugar out of your diet and insert the plant-based options. It is a benefit, and it can help your body. And one last peek at what the what the yeast is doing, and I want to show you that. It's been fed with sugar, and look at the cloudiness. Now again, this is what's supposed to happen in baking because the yeast is being fed. It's getting its energy to grow and expand, and as I said, the term in baking, bloom, meaning it will increase in its volume several times over. Now the thing about this is I only used a half a teaspoon of sugar and only 1 teaspoon of yeast, and it's already feeding it. I just want you to get that visual to understand what sugar as a feeder, as an activator, can do. All right, I think I've gotten the message across. I will, like I said, post some notes. Any follow-on questions, you can drop me a note. I sincerely hope this is beneficial to someone. It stayed in my mind for a while. It stuck with me. And when things happen like that, I want to go ahead and present it because I truly feel someone needs to hear it or see it or get a different perspective on a topic. So think about plant-based sugars. This is not just for the cancer overcomers. If you're dealing with diabetes or any other issue where you really need to be aware of your sugar intake, consider going to the plant-based sugars. All right, so this is again the Organic You in the Pantry. We were talking about agave. Thanks for listening in. We will bring you more products from In the Pantry, and I hope this In the Pantry series is really helpful to you. See you next time. Bye.